The fog rolled in from the bay, shrouding San Francisco in its characteristic veil of mystery. Johnny Ryder's office window framed the city's gloomy skyline, a vista that matched his mood. He was slouched behind his desk, hunched over a half-empty bottle of bourbon and a stack of unpaid bills that seemed to multiply faster than a rabbit in heat. The radio on his cluttered desk crackled to life, crooning the sultry tunes of a jazz number that oozed sorrow. Ryder took a drag from his cigarette, the wisps of smoke curling upwards to join the swirling mist outside. His eyes, sharp as a razor, studied the stained ceiling tiles, their watermarks forming abstract patterns that mirrored the complexities of his life. The office door swung open with a soft creak, and a woman stepped into the dimly lit room. Her entrance was like a sudden break in the clouds, a burst of sunlight that set his world askew. She had the kind of beauty that could bring even the toughest of men to their knees, and Ryder had seen enough in this city to know that trouble often came wrapped in silk and lace. She sauntered towards his desk, her hips swaying with a confidence that hinted at a hidden agenda. Her emerald green dress clung to curves that could make a priest break a vow or two. Her crimson lips were painted in a shade that screamed danger, and the way she fixed him with those sapphire eyes was enough to set off alarm bells in his whiskey-soaked brain. "Mr. Ryder, I presume?" she purred, her voice a smoky invitation. "Depends on who's asking," Ryder replied, taking another drag and exhaling a cloud of smoke towards the ceiling. He leaned back in his worn-out leather chair, studying her with a blend of suspicion and curiosity. "What's the trouble, doll?" She lowered her long lashes, her eyes glistening with a hint of tears. "My husband, Mr. Ryder, he's dead. Found in his office this morning, a bullet in his chest." Ryder couldn't help but notice the artful quiver in her lower lip, a skillful performance that would have earned an Oscar in Hollywood. His reputation as a hard-boiled detective meant he'd seen it all: crying dames, cheating husbands, and enough double crosses to fill the city's bay twice over. "Sounds like a job for the cops," Ryder muttered, flicking ash into a cracked glass ashtray. "Why come to me?" She leaned forward, her bosom perilously close to spilling out of that green dress. "Because, Mr. Ryder, I don't trust the police. There are things about my husband's death that I can't explain. Things that might ruin his reputation if they got out." Ryder arched an eyebrow. His interest, pie-kid, despot himself. "Spill it, sister. What kind of things?" She hesitated, her eyes searching his, for a sign of sympathy. "He had secrets, Mr. Ryder, secrets that could bring down some very powerful men, and I think one of them might have killed him." Ryder sighed, stubbing out his cigarette in the ashtray. He knew he was walking into a mess, but something about the way she looked at him, something about the way she said Mr. Ryder, made him feel like a knight in tarnished armor. He leaned forward, his voice low and gravelly. "All right, sweetheart. You've got my attention, but remember, in this city the truth is a rare gem, and digging it up can be a dirty business." The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Sinclair, a name that sounded as elegant as her presence. Ryder had a gut feeling that the elegance ended where her secrets began. "Sit tight, Ms. Sinclair," Ryder said, rising from his chair with the grace of a man twice his age. "I'll have my secretary, Daisy Diamonds, do some digging on your husband. Meanwhile, I'll get in touch with Billy and see if he can catch the whispers on the street. If there's something dirty brewing, we'll find it." Evelyn nodded, her gratitude evident in those ocean blue eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Ryder. I knew I came to the right man." As Ryder hung up the phone, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. The city was like a labyrinth, and every case was a tangled mess of lies and deceit. But he had a knack for finding the truth, no matter how well it was hidden. After leaving Evelyn in his office, Ryder stepped out onto the gritty streets of San Francisco. The fog had thickened, obscuring the neon lights that usually gave the city a nocturnal glow. He hailed a taxi and gave the driver an address, the scene of Evelyn's husband's murder. The cab weaved through the labyrinthine streets until it came to a stop in front of a run-down office building, its windows broken and graffiti decorating its facade. Police tape crisscrossed the entrance, But Ryder didn't let that deter him. He slipped under the tape and into the dimly lit building. The crime scene was a mess, papers scattered like confetti, furniture overturned, and the stale scent of gunpowder hanging in the air. Ryder pulled out a battered fedora and adjusted it on his head, a signature move that always signaled business. His sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the details that others might overlook. He noted the angle of the bullet hole, suggesting that the shot had come from a higher vantage point. The shattered window gave a clear view of the alley below, a perfect sniper's nest. His trained ear detected the faintest echo of a distant gunshot, a clue that would lead him to the murder weapon. As Ryder moved deeper into the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here before him, someone who had left no stone unturned. The crime scene was like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, and Ryder was determined to find them. He made his way to the desk, the epicenter of the chaos, and began sifting through the papers scattered haphazardly. It didn't take long for him to spot a photograph tucked beneath a stack of unpaid bills. It was a picture of Evelyn and her husband, their smiles genuine and their arms wrapped around each other. Ryder pocketed the photograph, a silent promise to himself that he'd uncover the truth, no matter how deep it was buried. The case was heating up, and in this city of shadows, Johnny Ryder was the one who thrived in the dark. Johnny Ryder's fingers were inches away from the ringing phone when he caught a fleeting glimpse of a reflection in the dusty mirror that adorned the wall. A hulking figure, twice the size of any regular man, was barreling toward him, wielding a club that looked like it had seen its fair share of brawls. With reflexes honed by years of navigating the treacherous waters of the city, Ryder made a split-second decision. He abandoned the phone and dove to the side, narrowly evading the incoming blow. The club crashed against the desk with a deafening thud, sending a shockwave of splintered wood through the room. Ryder rolled to his feet, his instincts kicking into high gear. He was on his feet in an instant, his hand reaching for the .38 snub-nose revolver tucked snugly in his shoulder holster. The intruder, a mountain of a man with a cruel sneer, was already swinging the club again, aiming to crush Ryder's skull. The detective fired a shot, the sharp report echoing in the confined space. The bullet grazed the intruder's arm, causing him to howl in pain and drop the club. Ryder lunged forward, delivering a well-placed punch to the man's midsection, causing him to stagger backward. But this brute wasn't finished. He pulled a switchblade from his coat, the blade gleaming ominously in the dim light. Ryder knew he had to end this quickly. With lightning speed, he closed the distance between them and delivered a roundhouse kick, sending the knife clattering across the floor. Before the intruder could recover, Ryder delivered a knockout punch that sent the man sprawling to the ground, unconscious and defeated. Sweat glistened on Ryder's brow as he stood there, breathing heavily, the taste of victory mingling with the metallic tang of danger in the air. The office had become a battlefield, and Ryder had emerged victorious. He knew that the attack hadn't been random. Someone had sent this behemoth to put an end to his investigation, and whoever it was, they were desperate to keep their secrets buried. Ryder picked up the fallen club, a grim reminder that in this city, danger lurked around every corner. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, knowing that this case had just taken a darker turn. As he finally reached for the phone to check in with Daisy and Billy, he couldn't help but wonder who was pulling the strings and what other shadows lurked in the depths of 1960 San Francisco. With the taste of victory still lingering in his mouth, Johnny Ryder replaced the receiver and dialed another number. Daisy's voice crackled through the line, her tone as crisp as ever. "Everything checks out, Johnny. The widow's story lines up, and there's no record of any foul play. Yet." "Good work, Daisy," Johnny replied, his voice low and gravelly. "Now, patch me through to Billy. I need to know what the streets are whispering." Moments later, a slightly breathless Billy Bubbles came on the line. "Johnny, you won't believe this, but word on the street is that there's a gangster's dirty mitts all over this one. No name yet, but it's the talk of the underground joints." Johnny nodded to himself. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but there were still missing edges that needed filling. He hung up the phone and turned his attention to the hulking figure sprawled unconscious on his office floor. Ryder crouched down and began to methodically search the intruder's pockets. He was looking for anything. A scrap of paper, a piece of identification, anything that would give him a lead. But the man was clean, a ghost, without a trace. Just when it seemed like this dead end couldn't get any deader, Ryder's fingers brushed against something tucked deep in the man's coat pocket. He pulled it out and examined it under the dim office light. A matchbook, its cover adorned with a glitzy diamond-studded 9 of diamonds. The 9 of diamonds, a name that carried weight in this city. It was a swanky joint where the bigwigs rubbed shoulders and secrets flowed like champagne. If there was a connection between the murder and this nightclub, Ryder was determined to unravel it. With newfound resolve, he pocketed the matchbook and got to his feet. He needed to venture into the heart of the city's nightlife, to navigate the smoke-filled rooms and the clinking glasses in search of answers and perhaps more danger. The night was far from over, and Johnny Ryder was just getting started. As he stepped out into the neon-lit streets of 1960s San Francisco, he knew that the city held its secrets close, but he was the one with the keys to unlock them. The 9 of diamonds awaited, and behind its glitzy facade lay a web of intrigue that only a detective like Johnny Ryder could untangle. Johnny Ryder walked into the 9 of diamonds with the ease of a man who knew how to blend into the shadows. The smoky air was thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and hushed conversations that carried the weight of secrets. He had barely taken a step toward the bar when a wall of a man with a face that could have been carved from granite blocked his path. "Mr. Morgan would like to see you, Mr. Ryder," the hulking figure rumbled, his voice as imposing as his presence. Johnny raised an eyebrow, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "Well, ain't that just swell? Lead the way." Without further ado, he was escorted to Mr. Morgan's office. Morgan himself was a small man, but his office exuded power like an overcharged wire. He looked up from behind his mahogany desk as Johnny entered, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You might want to think twice about what you're getting into, Ryder," Morgan cautioned, his voice like a snake's hiss. Johnny leaned against a nearby bookshelf, his posture nonchalant. "I'm a big boy, Mr. Morgan, and I've seen my fair share of trouble." Morgan's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Trouble's got a way of finding folks like you. The dead man and his wife, they were in over their heads, you know." Johnny's curiosity piqued. "Over their heads, you say?" Morgan leaned forward, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished surface of his desk. "Why don't you go back and ask her about the bonds? Might save yourself a heap of trouble, Ryder." As he spoke, Morgan's hand casually slid a gleaming pistol from a drawer and rested it on the desk, its cold steel a stark reminder of the consequences of asking too many questions. Johnny nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Well, Mr. Morgan, you've been a real charm, but I've got an appointment with a lady. Mind if I skedaddle?" Morgan's smile tightened, but he gave a nod of dismissal, and Johnny was on his way. Back in his office, Johnny knew he had more questions than answers. The bonds. What did they have to do with this tangled web of deceit? He needed to return to the widow, confront her with the newfound information, and see if her story held water or if she was just another player in this high-stakes game. The night was far from over, and Johnny Ryder was determined to chase down the truth wherever it led. With each step he took, he delved deeper into the shadows of San Francisco, where secrets were the currency of the city, and Johnny was hell-bent on cashing in. Johnny Ryder returned to his dimly lit office, his mind still spinning from his encounter with Mr. Morgan. The aroma of cheap coffee and stale cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air as he confronted his sharp-witted secretary, Daisy Diamonds. "Sorry, Johnny," Daisy said with a rueful smile, her auburn curls cascading around her shoulders. "But the dame took off like a bat out of hell. Scurried out of here like her heels were on fire." Johnny sighed, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "She's slippery, that one. Did she leave anything behind?" Daisy shook her head, her glossy red lips forming a sympathetic pout. "Nada, Johnny. Not a trace. But she did mention something about Billy waiting for you in your office." With a nod of gratitude, Johnny made his way to his cluttered office where Billy Bubbles sat, looking more befuddled than usual. The man's dishevelled hair and perpetually dazed expression belied the fact that he had an uncanny knack for gathering street-level information. "Hey, Billy," Johnny greeted with a regrin. "What's the word on the street?" Billy scratched his head, his face scrunched up in concentration. "Well, Johnny, it seems like Mrs. Sinclair's been slipping in through the back door of the Nine of Diamonds. Word is, just a couple of nights ago, Mr. Sinclair got himself a one-way ticket out that very same door. Big bouncer tossing him like yesterday's trash." Johnny leaned back in his worn leather chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "The plot thickens, my friend. Keep your ear to the ground. We need to know what else the streets are whispering about this mess." Billy grinned, his dimples showing beneath his unkempt beard. "You got it, Johnny. I'll dig up every nugget of info I can find." As Billy shuffled out of the office, Johnny couldn't help but admire the man's unwavering loyalty and street smarts. He was a diamond in the rough, a reliable source in the city's underbelly. With a sense of purpose, Johnny Ryder knew he had to untangle the threads of this case, no matter how far they led. The Nine of Diamonds held more secrets than a magician's hat, and Johnny was determined to pull the rabbit out of it, one way or another. The night wore on, and Johnny Ryder sat at his cluttered desk, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee that tasted like regret. He'd been deep into the labyrinth of his thoughts, tracing the winding paths of this perplexing case, when a knock echoed through the office. In stepped Chief Harris, his trench coat hanging haphazardly over his burly frame. He gave Johnny a weary nod, settling into the chair across the desk. "Well, Johnny, seems you beat me to the Nine of Diamonds. Just got back from a not-so-friendly chat with Mr. Morgan." Johnny offered a crooked smile. "You know me, Chief. Always first in line for the fun stuff." The chief leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from weariness to business. "So, what's the story, Ryder?" Johnny leaned back, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the scarred desktop. "The Sinclair dame might be in deeper than we thought, Chief. Her old man was kicked out of that swanky joint a few nights back, and it looks like he took a nosedive out of the nearest window. There's talk of some missing city bank bonds tied to all this mess." The chief's brow furrowed, and he drummed his fingers on the armrest. "Missing bonds, huh? That's a whole can of worms. I think I'll pay another visit to that club, do some more digging, see what shakes loose." As the chief made his exit, Johnny couldn't help but smirk. He knew the chief was a dogged bulldog when it came to cases like this, and if anyone could rattle the cages at the Nine of Diamonds, it was him. With the office door closing behind the chief, Johnny's gaze returned to the city skyline outside his window. The night was far from over, and there were still questions to be answered, secrets to be unravelled. The name Sinclair echoed in his mind like a haunting melody, and Johnny knew he had to pay a visit to the lady herself. He drained the last of his coffee, grabbed his fedora, and headed out into the streets of San Francisco, ready to turn over every stone until the truth came to light. The climb up the creaky stairs to apartment 548 felt like scaling Mount Everest, but Johnny Ryder had tackled bigger obstacles before. With a wry grin, he quipped to himself, if only they gave detective work hazard pay for staircases like these. Arriving at the door, he gave it a polite but firm knock, his knuckles rapping out a Morse code of anticipation. The door opened, and there she stood, Evelyn Sinclair, draped in a silky robe that clung to her every curve like a shadowy secret. The dame had style, and she knew how to wear it. Johnny tipped his fedora ever so slightly, his voice a low, smooth rumble dipped in honey and bourbon. "Evening, Miss Sinclair. Mind if I step in? There's a chill in the air, and your place looks mighty inviting." Evelyn's laughter was like the tinkling of crystal glasses in a smoky jazz joint. She moved aside, allowing Johnny to enter. "Of course, Mr. Ryder. Please, make yourself comfortable." Her eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief as she closed the door behind him. Johnny glanced around the tastefully decorated apartment, a blend of elegance and allure. "You've got quite a place here, Miss Sinclair. Mind if I ask how a woman like you ends up mixed up in a mess like this?" Evelyn sauntered over to a plush armchair, her movements fluid and tantalizing. She leaned against it, regarding Johnny with a gaze that promised both danger and delight. "Mr. Ryder, sometimes trouble has a way of finding those who appreciate its company. As for my involvement, well, that's a tale that might take a few drinks to unravel. Johnny couldn't help but admire her candor. She was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, and he was more than willing to play detective to uncover her secrets. With a knowing smirk, he leaned in closer. In that case, Miss Sinclair, how about we start with a couple of those drinks? Who knows what mysteries we might uncover over a good bourbon. As the night deepened and the city's lights cast long shadows through the apartment, Johnny Ryder and Evelyn Sinclair danced the tango of questions and answers, their words laden with innuendo and intrigue. In the world of 1960s San Francisco, where danger and desire mingled like smoke in the night, they were both players in a game where the stakes were high and the rules ever-shifting. Evelyn's anger flared like a match struck in a dark room. She shot up from her chair, her robe billowing dramatically. "You've got some nerve, Johnny Ryder, accusing me of such things." Her voice trembled with a potent mixture of fury and fear. Johnny, unyielding in his pursuit of the truth, stood his ground. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily between them. "It's a tough world out there, Evelyn, and sometimes folks get caught up in things they'd rather not admit. Morgan's no saint, and I reckon you ain't either." Evelyn paced the room, her agitation palpable. She finally stopped, and with a resigned sigh said, "All right, Ryder. You want the truth, the bonds. They're hidden in a safe deposit box at the Bayview Trust Bank. My husband, he didn't know about Morgan and me until recently. When he found out, he threatened to expose us. Morgan gave me those bonds to keep me quiet." Johnny nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "See, now we're getting somewhere. That wasn't so hard, was it?" Evelyn's shoulders slumped as she sank back into her chair. "What are you going to do, Johnny?" He stubbed out his cigarette in an ashtray with a thoughtful expression. "First, we'll wrap up this mess, make sure you're in the clear. Then I'll have a little chat with our friend, Mr. Morgan. This city's got enough dirty laundry without him adding to the pile." The room seemed to grow darker as the night wore on, but in that dimly lit apartment, Johnny Ryder had uncovered a sliver of the truth. It was a glimmer of clarity amidst the fog of deception that enveloped San Francisco's shadowy corners. Johnny Ryder, his eyes heavy with fatigue, rubbed his temples as the chief and Billy barged into his office. The sudden intrusion snapped him awake, and he quickly gathered his wits. He glanced at the two men and raised an eyebrow. "Well, this is quite the wake-up call, boys. What's the buzz?" The chief leaned against Johnny's cluttered desk, a mix of impatience and curiosity etched on his face. "Seems our friend Billy here was caught red-handed snooping around Morgan's office after hours." Billy, looking sheepish, scratched his head. "Well, Johnny, I was just trying to help. I thought maybe there'd be something there to tie him to Sinclair's murder." Johnny nodded at Billy's earnestness, then turned his attention to the chief. "Chief, there's something you need to know." He recounted the previous night's events, from Evelyn Sinclair's revelation to his plan to confront Morgan with the newfound evidence. The chief listened intently, his expression changing from skepticism to understanding as Johnny laid out the details. "All right, Ryder," he finally said, straightening up. "You've got a plan. I'll round up the troops and clean up the street, but you better be onto something here." With the chief's departure, Johnny's office was once again his domain. Daisy entered, her eyes conveying both concern and admiration for her boss. "Johnny, you sure know how to stir up trouble," he winked at her. "Wouldn't be a proper day in this town if I didn't, Daisy." Billy chimed in with his usual clumsiness. Yeah, let's get some breakfast, Johnny. My stomach's singing the blues." Johnny Ryder grinned, ready for another day in the unforgiving city of San Francisco. As they headed out in search of a hearty breakfast, the trio knew that the tangled web of crime, deception, and danger would always be waiting for them, just around the next corner.